I'd love to be able to just rest and people to go like, oh, Sammy, yeah, any given night, sure. That guy's, a world title contender and he could win, he could beat anybody any given night. But it's like, even after all these years and even after reaching the level that I reached and even after main eventing WrestleMania, I feel like there's this part where people still just don't think it's the next thing is possible. And there's a part of me that just wants to scream, well, why isn't it possible?
He is the man challenging one of the toughest champions in all of professional wrestling. He is the true underdog of the people, Sami Zayn. WWE rolls into Rockford at the BMO Center. Coming up here on March 24th. You can be a part of it. Tickets start just $20. $20 to get on the road to WrestleMania. That's how much it costs to get on the road to WrestleMania. You can get them right now at thebmocenter.com. Sammy, WrestleMania. Are you pumped? You've the opportunity of opportunities once again to possibly become Intercontinental Champion, but not just any Intercontinental Champion. You get to be the guy who maybe some people saying, Chad Gable said you couldn't do it, but I doubt that. You get to challenge Gunther for the IC title at WrestleMania. How are you feeling about this opportunity?
I think it's pretty big for sure. Coming off of last year where I found myself in a really let's call it right place, right time. But I caught a lot of steam and a lot of momentum heading into WrestleMania over the 6 months or so leading into it, and ended up in the main event. And anytime you do something big, I think in any field, not just as a wrestler or an artist or a whatever, but when you're able to accomplish something, there's always sort of like, oh, now what on the other side of it, and it's hard to sometimes keep that up or wonder what's next. What could you do to top it or anything like that? And if you watch WWE, you see how fast things move. And I feel very lucky to be in a pretty good position a year later, challenging, the longest reigning, most dominant Intercontinental Champion of all time. And if you're not in that top match with, let's say, Cody or Roman or The Rock or whatever now, I'd say this is the biggest match outside of that you could possibly want to be in. So I'm pretty grateful to find myself in that spot, and I'm excited about it.
Let's talk about Gunther. Obviously, you are a man who fought up the ranks internationally, nationally, and was somebody who had a lot of acclaim coming into WWE when you did, and so did he. But he's certainly evolved as you have. What is the intangible with him? Because on paper, he seems like a scary guy, but in the ring, there's just this other element that no one can really define with him that makes him so dangerous and just so, in the eyes of some people, unbeatable.
He's just, I don't know how else to say it without being, reductive here, but he's just really, really, really good. He's just very good. And I've known it for a very long time, but I think he's managed to continue to exceed, just continue to ascend to higher and higher levels. Because I thought he was really good, 10, 12 years ago when we got in the ring, whatever it was. Back.
Do you remember the first match you had with him, like pre-WWE?
Yeah, well, I remember we had a pretty prominent match. I think we may have once or twice, but I remember one pretty big one, which I actually defeated him. He was a very dominant champion in Germany. He was a world champion for a company called WXW, which is a very prominent company based out of Germany, even still. And he was a prominent champion, and I defeated him, and I ended that reign. So I'm wondering if somehow all these years later, history doesn't repeat itself, or he's become this dominant Intercontinental Champion, and I'm the one who ends that reign as well. So, even back then, he was incredible. And in fact, I was even asked about him when I first started with WWE. I had a pretty good relationship with the guy who scouted me and hired me, a guy called Canyon Seaman. And he was scouting talent all over the world. And he asked me, what do you think of this guy? I said, he's excellent. You should hire him. And unfortunately, they didn't right away. But eventually, talent at that level, it's going to find its way to the top, always. And it did. And now, he's in the spot he's in. It's kind of like it's natural that he would end up in the position he's in.
The chops. I've been watching wrestling my entire life, and some people have this visceral reaction to that sound, and it is undeniably painful. And he probably has the worst we've ever seen in wrestling, and you have to be maybe on the receiving end of that. Most likely, you're going to have to endure a couple of them. What is it like to take a chop from him? Because it does not look like a pleasant experience.
No, it's not. That's for sure. Okay, so the chops, I think, jump out at people because of what you said, like that sound, that loud crack across the chest. So, people respond to that because anybody can understand when a sound like that, they know they can make that association with what that feels like, because everybody at one point or another has been slapped or something, so people can really relate to that. Whereas I think a lot of other things that we do in the ring, people can't fully relate to because, maybe they haven't been dropped on their head or body slammed or whatever. It's a little harder to relate to that. But everything he does is pretty painful. And the chops do stand out, but everything he does is really with 110% intensity. And you're talking about what kind of separates him. And I think that's it. It's that it's everything he does at the highest level, including those chops, which, some guys will throw a chop or two and then, shoot the guy off the ropes or whatever. Everything he does has a lot of impact and a lot of meaning. And I think that's what makes him so domineering. I don't know. I think that's it.
You are the Rocky heading into Philadelphia. I don't know if you're rewatching some of that, but I'm getting the Rocky vibes going into this. And you had it felt a little bit like a scene out of one of the Rocky movies where Adrian goes to Rocky and says, "You can't beat him." And this may have been a situation with somebody you have some history with Chad Gable. You guys had I think one of the most memorable matches to build up to WrestleMania, and that gauntlet, and he said, "You can't beat it." What does it feel like when somebody says that to you? Because it seems like you're a pretty resilient guy. It seems like that chip gets on your shoulder. It gets pretty big when somebody says that to you.
Yeah. I feel like in some ways this is a recurring theme throughout my career, maybe throughout my life, in fact, where it's like this constant battle to prove yourself. And no matter what you do, it feels like it's never quite enough to prove it. I don't know, like you just never have. I'd love to be able to just rest and people to go like, "Oh, Sami, yeah, any given night, sure. That guy's, a world title contender and he could win. He could beat anybody any given night." But it's like, even after all these years and even after reaching the level that I reached and even after main eventing WrestleMania, I feel like there's this part where people still just don't think the next thing is possible. And there's a part of me that just wants to scream, well, why isn't it possible? The last thing didn't seem possible. The thing before that didn't seem possible. Every step of the way didn't seem possible, and yet here I am. So when does it stop being a fluke? And, I guess I've just had to come to terms with some people get that luxury and some people don't. And maybe I'm just one of those people that will always kind of be counted out a little bit. But I've learned to make it work for myself throughout my career. So it's not the first time I've been told you can't. And I also don't think it'll be the first time that I prove people wrong. Because I think that title is coming home to me in Philadelphia.
Oh, boy. That is a declarative statement. Let's get a little bit lighter here. You're on that WrestleMania card. You want to have on the biggest show of the year, the best match of the year. But this is a very, very stacked card. They've projected this to be the biggest WrestleMania of all time. I've interviewed you before WrestleMania in Texas where you had a very memorable match. You're in a position to once again top that. But you look at this, The Rock, Cody Rhodes, Roman Reigns, 2 nights. They're going to stretch that out. There's other big matches on here. When you look at WrestleMania, for you, what are those matches where you need to be in front of a monitor as that happened? You need to see that. You're still a fan of this. You wouldn't be where you are if you weren't a fan of this. Who are you excited to see have a big moment or performance on WrestleMania?
I'm pretty excited for Jimmy and Jey. Obviously the history with those guys, I think getting to see them go one-on-one, and I know how much that match means to them. I'm pretty excited to see what they can do with each other. I remember being a huge fan of the Hardys, the Hardy brothers, back in the day. And the first time they were going at it, I was just so intrigued to see these two guys who come up together, and what's it going to be like when they're finally on the other side. Because you've never seen that before. You've always seen them together. So it's the first time you see them on opposite sides of the ring, one-on-one. That's very intriguing to me, especially with the bond they have as twins, both in the ring and out of the ring. It's very, I think that's the one I'm kind of looking forward to the most. And of course, Cody and Roman, that story's been pretty well told. And now The Rock with this tag match, I think is very interesting. So there's no shortage of interesting matches, but just at first blush, I think the one that jumps out to me in terms of piquing my curiosity, I would say it's Uso versus Uso.
It's a pretty big act to cover, I mean, it's just when I look at the card.
You're right. You're absolutely right. The card is stacked up and down, and I feel like the whole company's just firing on all cylinders, or everyone's just the tide is rising collectively, and everybody is operating at higher levels than they kind of ever have. And it just makes it so exciting top to bottom. And that's, I know we've been compared to the Attitude Era so many times, and everyone talks about, wrestling in the heyday or whatever with The Rock and Austin. And I will say this, the one thing about that time period that I thought was so cool, that was hard to replicate, but I feel like we're there now, was people cared about pretty much every match, top to bottom. And even people who were opening match or match 2, match 3, anywhere, there was a story. People cared about them, and people were just excited from the beginning of the night to the end of the night. And I feel like we're kind of hitting on that now. And this WrestleMania card that we're approaching now is it's reflective of that. I think no matter where you are on the card, people are invested in whatever story you're telling them right now.
You're going to be in action in Rockford. Once again, tickets are available at thebmocenter.com. You can get those through thebmocenter.com. WWE Road to WrestleMania.